Number 1. E.I. DuPont, 1834. You may have seen the DuPont chemical logo around. Their products have been used in almost every U.S. war since 1812. The company's founder, E.I. DuPont, was 63 when he died on October 31st, 1834. There is much to be said about the man himself, but the creepy details are actually weaved into the legacy of the company he founded. 5 generations later, John DuPont would find himself training Olympic wrestler David Schultz. One January day, John DuPont pulled up his car next to the wrestler. For reasons which are still unclear, John DuPont pointed a gun in his direction and asked, "Do you have a problem with me?" before firing 3 shots at David, killing him. The ordeal is shown in the film Foxcatcher. Number 2. Harry Houdini, 1926. The famed escape artist known as Harry Houdini died on Halloween. The details of what happened are not 100% agreed upon, but what can be sure is that it was a result of a student from McGill University who decided to test Houdini by punching him in the abdomen. Apparently, the student was testing Houdini's toughness, which Houdini himself supposedly often boasted. And the punch resulted in a ruptured appendix, which led to his death. So maybe don't try that one at home. Number 3. Peter Fabiano, 1957. The doorbell dinged on Halloween and Peter Fabiano answered. The masked trick-or-treater in front of him held up a paper bag. Unbeknownst to Mr. Fabiano, there was no candy inside. Instead, it contained a revolver. There was a loud bang and Mr. Fabiano collapsed dead on his front doorstep. Had he lived, he would have been shocked to discover the identity of his shooter. The strange details go like this. Mr. Fabiano's wife, Betty, had an intimate relationship with a woman named Joan. Joan was a former employee of Peter Fabiano. Betty convinced Joan that her husband was a man of pure evil. Joan, in turn, convinced her friend, Goldwyn Pizer, to then purchase a gun and commit murder. Goldwyn Pizer did not even know Peter Fabiano, making this whole case very unusual. Even decades later, many are left wondering what was going on in the minds of these women. Number 4. Katherine Armstrong, 1963. Katherine Armstrong, 70, was last seen alive by her children, who reported seeing her look out her window around 6:30 p.m. Halloween night. Chillingly, her body was found the next day. She was fully clothed in her home in Newcastle. The retired school teacher had been beaten, battered, and stabbed 28 times near her face, and a nylon stocking was tied around her neck. Wounds on her hands suggested she had tried to defend herself. Since there was no sign of forced entry, police ruled it was possible Miss Armstrong knew her murderer. The police had few leads and ultimately interviewed up to 16,000 people in the search to find her killer. However, the case remains unsolved. Number 5. Timoty O'Bryan, 1974. As it turns out, the warnings of poison candy are real, but it might not come from the source you think. In the case of 8-year-old Timoty O'Bryan, his own father was the culprit. Timothy's father, Ronald Clark O'Bryan, was over $100,000 in debt and decided the best way to pay this back was to take out a life insurance policy on his young son. In order to cash in, of course, he decided to kill Tommy, which he did by lacing his pixie sticks with cyanide. Even more disturbing is the fact that Ronald attempted to cover up the crime by distributing the poison candy to his daughter and 3 other children. However, neither his daughter or his other children ate the poison candy. Mr. O'Bryan was found guilty, and there were several possible dates for his execution. One of those dates was supposed to be on Halloween, 1982, but that date was delayed. The judge even offered to drive Mr. O'Bryan to the death chamber. A prison guard noted of Mr. O'Bryan that he was, quote, absolutely friendless until the day he died by lethal injection. Number 6. Nima Louise Carter, 1977. On Halloween night, Nima was 19 months old. Her parents placed her inside her crib and went to sleep. The next morning, Nima's parents found the crib empty. Nima was missing, with no sign of forced entry. 1 month later, some kids were playing in an abandoned house nearby. There was an old refrigerator inside, which they opened. Horrified, they discovered Nima's body inside. A similar crime had occurred a year before when a pair of 3-year-old twin sisters, Mary and Tina Carpenter, were lured out of their home by a young woman and forced inside a refrigerator at another abandoned house. After 2 days, the twins were found. Mary had suffocated, but Tina had survived. Tina identified her abductor as the local teenage babysitter, Jacqueline Rubidoux. At the time, Tina's evidence was called into question due to her age and trauma she endured. Jacqueline eventually became the babysitter for Nima. Jacqueline Rubidoux was eventually charged with the murder and ended up dying in prison in 2005. She never admitted to killing Nima Louise Carter. Number 7. Shirley Ledford, 1979. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were a pair of serial killers who worked together to torture and kill 5 people. They became known as the Toolbox Killers because their torture instruments could fit into a normal-sized toolbox. On Halloween night, 1979, Shirley Lynette Ledford became one of their victims. She was abducted while standing near a gas station trying to hitchhike her way home from a Halloween party. In addition to this heinous torture inflicted on Miss Ledford, the duo also found thrill in tape recording the event. The recording was the key piece of evidence at the criminal trial. Bittaker is currently serving on death row in San Quentin, and Norris is serving a life sentence. Number 8. Orange Socks, 1979. Orange Socks was an unidentified woman whose strangled body was found in a ditch outside of Georgetown, Texas in 1979. She is believed to have been murdered on Halloween. She gets her name from the only item of clothing found on her at the time. It is not known who killed her or why, but infamous serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to killing her while in prison. This claim is doubtful by authorities, however. To add to the mystery, an unidentified woman with similarities to Orange Socks was also found dead and naked in Walker County, Texas, exactly 1 year after the death of Orange Socks. Number 9. Sister Tadea Benz, 1981. Johnny Frank Garrett was 19 when he raped, strangled, and stabbed elderly nun Sister Tadea Benz to death. On October 31st, 1981, she was found in her convent in Amarillo, Texas by fellow nuns, having last been seen alive the night prior. The nuns immediately transported her body to a funeral home, where the embalming process began. However, the nuns also discovered a broken window at the scene of the crime and called the police, who later found a kitchen knife under her bed. The reason for the murder is unclear, although it is noted that Garrett suffers from severe mental handicaps. Garrett was executed in 1992. Number 10 and 11. Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman. Early Halloween morning, time unknown. Location, a Manhattan apartment. Police discover the bodies of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman, who were brutally beaten, then shot in the head, execution style. The entire apartment had been ransacked as well, due to the nature of the murders and Sisman's rumored drug habit. Police originally suspected drug money to be the motive. However, during the investigation, police stumbled across something bizarre. A prison informant claimed he knew a fellow inmate who had had predicted the double homicide weeks in advance. That inmate turned out to be one of the most notorious serial killers in history, the son of Sam himself, David Berkowitz. Berkowitz claimed to be part of a satanic cult which performed ritual killings and blamed the murders on the cult. Berkowitz said this is why several details of his prediction lined up with the murders. The crime is still unsolved. Number 12. Indira Gandhi, 1984. Quote, "I am alive today. I may not be there tomorrow. I shall continue to serve until my last breath, and when I die, I can say that every drop of my blood will invigorate India and strengthen it." Those words are from the last speech of India's only female prime minister. The date of that speech was October 30th, 1984, one day before two of her trusted security guards assassinated her in cold blood. As a result, India erupted into wide-scale riots, which left up to 8,000 people dead. This can best be described as a terrible domino effect. Number 13. David Stone, 1988. David Stone was a California native. He was 29, well-dressed. He had a successful job analyzing the stock market. He was also heavily into the New Age movement. Around 6 a.m. Halloween morning, 1988, a farmer spotted David walking along a dirt road. The two talked briefly, as it was rare to see anyone in that remote part of Arizona. That's when David told the farmer that he was looking for the beast. Several local residents had saw him after that, all of whom said he was acting strangely, muttering to himself. That day was the last he was ever seen alive. 5 days later, an abandoned car was found along a highway in New Mexico. It was discovered that David left behind several cryptic messages before his complete disappearance. Rock pyramids were found near locations David had likely visited. Fibonacci numbers were scrawled in the sand, believed to be left by David. His parents also found a note in David's bedroom which read, quote, "They think the word is in the safe. 6 knives in Rob's room. Use buys your tea and use take your chances. Halloween." Number 14. River Phoenix, 1993. In his 23 years of existence, River Phoenix racked up 24 acting titles, including Stand By Me, based on the novel by Stephen King. He had a disturbing childhood, having been raised in a cult called the Children of God. Phoenix did leave the cult together with his siblings. However, River Phoenix was still left with scars from the Children of God days and struggled with drug addiction. This unfortunately culminated in a night of partying at Johnny Depp's Los Angeles club, the Viper Room, where he suffered a fatal overdose. His brother, Joaquin, who famously played Johnny Cash in Walk the Line, was the one to frantically call 911. Sadly, River Phoenix passed away on the sidewalk outside of the club while his friends and family tried to revive him. Number 15, 16, and 17. Edgar Evans, Stephen Coates, and Reggie Crawford, 1993. These boys were barely teenagers. They were walking home with a large group of friends in Pasadena from a long night of trick-or-treating. A car stopped to ask them if they wanted a ride home. As it turns out, it was the mother of one of the boys. They decided to continue on foot, and she left. Shortly after, the boys, quote, reached a house surrounded by thick brush and a fence where at least 2 men jumped out, fired a gun, and ran up the street, getting into cars and driving away, according to the LA Times. All 3 boys died of their injuries. Despite a quiet summer that year, police suspect gang members had jumped the boys, although a motive was never clearly established. Number 18. Tony Bagley, 1994. Tony Bagley was only 7 on Halloween in 1994 when he was murdered. Tony was walking down a Las Vegas street coming back from trick-or-treating. With him were his sister, aunt, and mother. As they walked the street, a man in a hoodie ran towards them, brandishing a gun and shooting Tony. The perpetrator then got into a car and drove away. The killer has never been caught, and police speculated that the shooting was revenge against Tony's father for a drug deal gone wrong. Years later, Tony's story would be broadcast on America's Most Wanted, but publicist Ivy Van Allen said, "We didn't get any calls." Number 19. Carl Jackson, 1998. Some pranks just aren't funny. Egging is one of them. And tragically for Carl Jackson, some teenagers egged his car while he was driving in the Bronx. He got out of the car to confront the eggers, saying his piece. When he went to get back into his car, however, one of the teenagers pulled a gun on him and shot him. His mother says, quote, "We never thought that anyone from our family would be murdered, especially on a holiday, for something stupid." As a precursor to his death, Carl told loved ones that he didn't like to go out on Halloween because he thought it was too dangerous. Number 20. Chris Jenkins, 2002. Christopher Jenkins left a Halloween party and went to a bar in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A few hours after arriving, Christopher was ejected by 2 off-duty police officers working security. There are conflicting reports as to why he was ejected, but he was only wearing an American Indian costume in 20-degree weather. What happened to Christopher after that is still a mystery. Family and friends became worried when he did not return home. On 2 separate occasions, bloodhounds tracked his scent from a pizza shop across the street from the bar to a parking garage. Drops of blood were also found in the garage, but his scent ended there. 4 months later, Christopher's body was found in the Mississippi River. His family searched for answers. Strangely, Christopher was found floating on his back, with his arms folded across his chest, and he had human hair clenched in his left hand. GHP, the date rape drug, was also found in his system. Based off these findings, his cause of death was changed from the initial ruling of an accidental death to homicide. Theories abound about what happened to Christopher, but most people agree it is much more nefarious than a careless drinking accident, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Christopher's own mother suspects he was a victim of a gang which abducts young men and murders them and makes their deaths look like an accident. Some people have even suspected he was the victim of the elusive and as of yet unproven smiley face killer. What really happened, we may never know. Number 21. Tina Mayberry, 2002. Tina Mayberry's brother, William, remembers his sister. He says, quote, "You just don't know how good of a person she was, how fun she was, how full of life she was. She was the victim of Jeremy Bryan Jones, a self-proclaimed serial killer who killed multiple other women. On Halloween night 2012, Jones dressed up his roommate's 12-year-old son and the boy's friend to look like Ace Frehley and Gene Simmons of the rock group Kiss. Then Jones went to the local tavern where he encountered Miss Mayberry, who was wearing a Betty Boop costume. He stabbed her to death in the parking lot. Jones eventually confessed to her murder and several others. Number 22. T.J. Darrisaw, 2008. T.J. Darrisaw was trick-or-treating with his family. That's when he saw the porch light at Quentin Patrick's house was on. Naturally, TJ, along with his brother and father, approached the house and knocked on the door. Instead of candy or a greeting, 22-year-old Quentin Patrick blasted through the door with 30 rounds. 11 of those rounds struck TJ and killed him. To this day, the neighborhood is considered taboo on Halloween. Number 23, 24, and 25. Susan Liskey, William Liskey, and Derek Liskey, 2010. Devin Griffin was just another teenager attending church that fateful day in 2010. But when he came home and opened his front door, he found the bodies of his family. A horrified Devin called 911 and told the operator the scene looked like something from a haunted house. His mother, Susan, Susan's new husband, William, and Derek, William's brother, were all beaten over the head to death. The perpetrator was William's son from another marriage. His motive wasn't entirely clear, but as it turns out, William Liskey Jr. had a history of violence and schizophrenia. He pled guilty to the crime. William Jr. would later state, quote, "I love my dad very much, and it makes me feel sick every time I think about what I did. I can't really explain why this all had to happen, but I think most of it had to do with my mental illness." Number 26. Taylor Van Dyest, 2011. Taylor Van Dyest was an average Canadian teenager, dressed as a zombie, complete with fake blood. She was supposed to meet a friend to go trick-or-treating, but that never happened. That's because Taylor was severely beaten and left to die near some railroad tracks. She was rushed to the hospital where she passed away. No one seems to know who killed her, but chillingly, local police have also received a cryptic letter, possibly warning of future violence in the community. Number 27. Rebecca Gay, 2012. John Douglas White had a disturbing motivation for killing his fiance's daughter. The details of his motivation are better left to the imagination, so look them up at your own peril. But on Halloween Day, 2012, the ex-con preacher with a history of violently assaulting women killed Rebecca Gay, 24. Afterwards, he dressed up her 3-year-old son, who was home at the time of the killing, and delivered the young boy to her father's house. Hopefully the child was too young to remember any of what happened. John Douglas White committed suicide in prison. Number 28. Jordan Moreland, 2013. Jordan had been stringing up the house all day with Halloween decorations, so this spirited teen decided to play a prank on his sister by putting a noose around his neck and pretending to hang himself. However, within 30 seconds, all oxygen had been cut off to his brain, and he sadly passed away. His mother says she hopes his death will make kids think again before pulling pranks on others. Number 29, 30, and 31. Anthony Seabury, Sean Rhodes, and Kevin Thompson, 2013. No one knows why the killer struck. In fact, very few details surround the Halloween deaths of Anthony, Sean, and Kevin, who were all shot in various boroughs of New York City. Sean Rhodes was shot first in Brooklyn around 7. Anthony Seabury was shot next around 8:30. His murder was second of the 3 that night, but from the scene, police retrieved video evidence of the shooter, who had been wearing a scream mask. Lastly, the Ghostface killer shot Kevin Thompson around 11:30 in Brooklyn. Police still do not know who killed the